Have you ever wondered what the underlying root cause was to almost any illness or injury? If so, then join us today as Dr. Melissa Sell explains how German New Medicine can help us unravel the conflicts associated with almost any disease and illness. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today's guest is Dr. Melissa Sell, and we are going to be talking about New German Medicine. Now, we do tie this into trauma as well, but even outside of just trauma, we look at how New German Medicine can shine a light on the root cause to just about any illness and disease. This is a really fascinating medicine. I came across this many years back and found it really insightful. And if you remember, we recently talked with Dr. Todd Ovokadis again for the trauma series. We've had Dr. Todd back for a couple different interviews because he's just such a genius. And he was talking about something called mind-body logic. And he even said during that mind-body logic was essentially, prior to that, was kind of taken to some point from New German medicine. So, or that it's been termed in different names at different times, but New German Medicine was one of the originals of this concept that there are specific conflicts that we have unresolved, or different shocks that have taken place in our life that, if unresolved, that will then lead to a manifestation of disease and illness. And so, given that a lot of times trauma is a specific shock, and a lot of times the sequelae to trauma is usually tied with different changes in physical health. So a lot of times people that have trauma have all sorts of different illness that can develop down the road. And a lot of times what they might not be totally aware of is that that unresolved conflict from that original shock, if that wasn't processed properly, that physical problem may perpetuate and continue and never really be resolved. So Dr. Melissa Sell takes us into all of this in more detail, and we look at some of the different conflicts that can develop. She explains the whole process on how it happens. And Dr. Hammer was the founder of New German Medicine, and she explains kind of his personal story and how he came to it. We look at the difference in how the role of microbes might play in health and illness, which is very different than we often hear from a conventional allopathic model of medicine, which I think is really important to look at. We also look at a New German Medicine perspective on COVID. We start to learn and understand the biological laws according to New German Medicine. So we get into a lot of different things. And one of the parts that I thought was really interesting that we did discuss around was the concept of resilience. Resilience is something that I'm definitely really big on, and that's a big focus in my practice, is how to build resilience for people. And one of the things that she talked about is that one of the best ways that we can build resilience is to resolve these underlying conflicts. Because part of the process is that when you resolve these underlying conflicts, you also decrease that stressor on the body that's always ongoing. When we have these unresolved conflicts, there's a stressor in the background that's just always pushing our physiology, right? It's never really getting better. It's always amping things up. It's always setting the stage for problems. And we know now through epigenetic models that chronic stress turns on different genes for disease and turns off different genes for health. So we know that stress is a chronic problem. But what I like about New German Medicine is it doesn't just tie it into an overall big bucket called stress. It actually takes that and tries to really pinpoint the very unique individual conflict that a person may be going through that's causing the stressor on the body. And so I think this is incredibly fascinating. I think this is a really interesting interview. If you like this, and make sure you go and check out Dr. Todd's interview too. I can't remember the number on it at the moment, but it was somewhere in the 90s, I think. And you'll get a better picture of all of this pulled together. Now, speaking of resilience, the other thing that I do when I think about resilience is you got to think about it from a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual level. So when we talk about resilience, we have to look at all of these bodies of health. All of these things are part of what is going to give us the ability to manage our life very effectively. The more problems we've got in any one of those layers, the lower our resilience starts to go. Now, you're going to hear through this episode how important it is to work on these upper layers around the mental emotional sphere, because that's what segues down into the physical. Now, at the same point, I think that it's also really important to do what you can to support the physical body. There's all different parts of it. So, in my mind, too, when we actually even work with some of the mental emotional parts, we then actually move into a different state where we want to take care of our physical body in a more profound way. So if you've watched my last episode that I did with Dr. David Hawkins a little bit of back, where I did a tribute to him, I think it was episode 100. And I talked about levels of consciousness, and really important, because as we move into different levels of consciousness, we feel different. We see our world different. We see ourselves different. Everything literally changes. Our reality literally changes depending on the level of consciousness that we are functioning in. And so I break that concept down. And what I've noticed is that as I move into different levels of consciousness, what even appeals to me completely changes. So what I want to eat changes. I am drawn towards certain things and not drawn towards other things anymore. I would find the same thing around the content that I want to bring into my sphere. So even things like movies and television shows, certain things I just have no desire to watch anymore. It just doesn't resonate with me anymore. And if I pay attention to my body, it doesn't make my body feel good. So the same thing happens, that as you move through these different levels of consciousness, and all of a sudden you're drawn to different things. Now, so what I'm getting at with that is that a lot of times we think we need to change our diet and all of these different pieces. Now, I'd say for the most part, lifestyle management is incredibly important, but it's not something that we try to force ourselves to do. When I find that it really sticks is when we just shift in consciousness, then we're drawn to certain things. So it's not like work all the time. Otherwise I feel like diet feels like punishment for people, that you can't have things. You move to a certain phase and you just don't care so much about things anymore. So when you start to shift into these different phases of how you're viewing your life, these different states of consciousness, you're just drawn to different things. For quite some time now, I've just been really drawn to want to look after my health better. So it means I eat a certain way and I look after myself as best as I can, and I try and get better sleep, and I try and manage my mental emotional world. And there's certain things that I take for supplementation. I take certain nutrients to support my immune system and my overall health. I check certain markers out at times just to see where I am and to know how to support my optimal functioning. And one of the things that I think does such a big overall global picture of building resilience is the carbon 60 from Purple Power. It really is this underlying molecule that supports so many major phases that often relate to chronic illness. And whenever you can incorporate something like that, I think it just covers lots of different bases. So I take about a teaspoon to maybe 1.5 teaspoons a day. It's just an oil, it's easy to do. And I know that when I'm taking it, I am mitigating oxidative load, because it's an incredibly powerful free radical scavenger, or it's really powerful antioxidant. It's also going to help to sequester some of the inflammation. It's going to kind of pull that down a little bit. And we know that inflammation is a cornerstone from almost any disease. So I want to keep that always in check. And then I'll periodically look at markers to make sure that it's also on check. I'll look at things like ESR and HSCRP and some of these inflammation markers to make sure that I'm in good health and that those things are being monitored well. And then it also supports pregnenolone, pregnenolone being the precursor to just about every other steroid hormone that we have. So if we are under too much stress, that gets drained off, and we're sort of moving it to make cortisol and taking away from making some of our other sex hormones. So being able to take C60 also helps me utilize pregnenolone more effectively. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go check out the website. They've got lots of information on it. If you click the link below and then use the promo code DRLOKEN, all in capitals, that's Dr. Loken, that will give you 15% off. Or at the website, inspiredpodcast.com, click the link on the top right corner, and that will take you to the site and give you 15% off. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I had a lot of fun talking to Dr. Sell, and let me know what you think. All right, guys, I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast as we continue on with our series on trauma recovery from surviving to thriving. And today we've got Dr. Melissa Sell. And Dr. Melissa Sell is a chiropractor and Germanic New Medicine consultant. She helps people to understand their symptoms from a German New Medicine perspective, guides them in learning to trust their bodies, and teaches them mental shifts for creating a deep sense of peace and well being. Melissa, what an honor to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited to chat with you too. I've been familiar with German New Medicine for several years now, and when I was recently did one of the other episodes, and I think I was telling you before this that we got a comment back saying I need to contact you to interview you for this series because they really liked the work that you did. So I checked everything out and saw, oh, that's awesome. You do German New Medicine. That was one of the topics I wanted to cover anyways, and you're a chiropractor as well. So we'll kind of blend those worlds when we have our conversation today.
Perfect.
One of the things I really like about German New Medicine is it gets people to think very differently from the context of how we are traditionally taught around medicine and even around our bodies. So I think one of the things I really love about it, and I think is such an important concept to bring to people, is that it honors the inherent natural intelligence of the body. It's sort of like it's not like our job is to basically be here and just try to survive and protect ourselves from everything bad going on. It's like there's a wisdom that goes on in the body. And I really think German New Medicine really dials that in so that there's an opportunity for us to continually grow and evolve if we pay attention to what's going on. So maybe I'll pass it over to you to just introduce yourself a little bit and how you came across German New Medicine, and then give an overview of what it is, and then we'll start to go through some of the details.
Totally. I love what you said because that's what drew me to GNM and the five biological laws is the recognition of the deep, deep intelligence inside of the body. And that from my chiropractic training and chiropractic philosophy is all about innate intelligence, that the body is wise and ancient and knows what to do to survive. And all of that survival wisdom is programmed into every tissue, layer, cell, embryologic, all of this, it's all programmed in. And so what we experience as dis-ease, as symptoms, we can, our modern minds see it as, oh, this is wrong, cut this out. Oh, this is high, let's bring it down. This is low, let's bring it up. Instead of recognizing, oh, there's wisdom here. The body is doing this for an intentional reason. And so I was in the realm of chiropractic care and holistic lifestyle. So I taught people nutrition and exercise and detox and all of the behavioral things to do to what I believe was to be healthy and to prevent disease from forming in the body, because I believe that things like, sugar feeds cancer and toxins cause cancer and all of these, external things in the world. We need to do our best to avoid them and to cleanse them out of our lives so our body doesn't, produce cancer. But when early in 2017, I came across Germanic New Medicine, GNM, the five biological laws. And I heard Dr. Hammer's story, which, if you're unfamiliar, he lost his 17-year-old son. He was shot and died a few months after this tragic injury. And then after that, Dr. Hammer developed testicular cancer. And he made the connection. There had to be a link between his traumatic loss and this cancer. And so he took that idea and investigated it further by interviewing patients. He worked in oncology, so he talked to people who had cancer. And then he started looking at the brains of people who had cancer. And so he started to piece together what developed into these five biological laws, which are laws of nature that have always existed, that are present in every single organism. And he found that every time someone had a traumatic loss, a man in particular had a loss, they would develop testicular cancer. Every time a person who had a lung tumor, they had some type of death fright conflict. A woman with a breast gland tumor had a nest worry conflict. So he started, so it wasn't just stress, because for a long time we've associated, Hans Selye with stress and disease, and that we the idea is that stress depletes the body, makes it weak, and then the immune system isn't functioning, and therefore cancer cells can take over. And so there's like this almost this inner battle that's going on where we have to be conscious and boost our immune system and make sure our immune system is working so we don't get cancer. But Dr. Hammer and his work changes that narrative and changes our understanding of what cancer actually is. So cancer is not a wrongness. Rather, it is an intentional biological tissue adaptation that develops in response to our perception and experience of a shocking trauma, something that catches us off guard in a moment, a loss, a phone call. I'm sorry, your son is gone, your wife is gone, your business is sunk. This shock in a moment, and your psyche, you couldn't handle it. It exceeded your threshold for what you could handle and understand. And so your body steps in with these adaptations. And so what that's called is a conflict shock, or a DHS, and it is registered by the psyche. In the brain, there is a measurable impact. Dr. Hammer did CT scans and analyzed the CT scan and found that in particular regions of the brain that control particular organs, depending on the type of shock the person had, there's a ring formation in the brain, and there's tissue adaptation on the organ level. So he developed this entire system of looking at the body and decoding and understanding, what does a rash mean? What does a sore throat mean? What does a sty mean? What is a urinary tract infection? All of these things, rather than looking at them as failures of the immune system or the body, some type of malfunction or an outside agent like a bacteria or a virus that gets in us and causes a problem. What we're seeing is the effect of tissue adaptation initiated by shocking traumas. So that's kind of like the big picture of what this work is. And it's very deep. The 5 biological laws go through our embryology. It's connected to our developmental history as organisms. And it's very deep and rich and fascinating science of why we develop certain tissue adaptation conditions.
Hmm. Yeah, I find it completely fascinating, and if people, I think on some intuitive level, I think people kind of get that. I think that they do know that there's more than just this physical body. I think that we've just been sort of conditioned to think that that's what we need to work with, and we kind of forget the other parts. And I think probably even we don't want to work with the other parts because there's sometimes a little bit more work involved to work with these underlying conflicts. It usually means we have to make certain changes once we make certain realizations, and whether we're really prepared to do that or not. Those are all some of the things I think we wrestle with. But I'll often get people in clinic to do patients to do a timeline of their physical injuries and kind of have peaks at when they run through different times where they had major illnesses or injuries, and then do another one that's more of a mental emotional sort of stressor timeline, and then do peaks on when they had bigger sort of stressors in their life, right? And you'll almost always see a stressor point preceding the physical manifestation of something. And I mean, I see it over and over again, no matter what it is, when you kind of go back and ask, like, okay, well, what was going on kind of around that time? Maybe anywhere from like 6 months to where you are. What kind of stuff had taken place? And you almost always find some major stressor. So I think the thing is that most people get then, or I should say, if they're open enough to looking at that, so then once they've realized that there is a conflict, how do they start the process of what's required to resolve a conflict, I guess? So once they become aware that there's a conflict, like, oh crap, okay, yeah. So that problem is related to this. So now that they've kind of drawn that awareness, what's the next step? What would they start to do with that?
Even more awareness because most of our conflicts and things, by the time we have a symptom, we've already resolved it most of the time, because most symptoms come on during the first phase of tissue restoration after the conflict resolution. And so we are spontaneously all the time processing and resolving conflicts. And so by adding this awareness in and noticing, oh, you know what, this shifted. I was really worried. I was really stressed about this thing that was happening. I was shocked by it. And then I was losing sleep about it. Oh, but then I got that answer, that solution came. That's when I chilled out. That's when I relaxed. And ooh, that's when my physical pain started. That's when that's when the headache kicked in. That's when the symptoms began. And so by understanding the biological laws, really that is the essence of really how do you incorporate this, is you have to recognize it. You have to know when you're in conflict, and that it requires self-awareness. And a lot of people, they're so busy, they're so externally oriented, to slow down and to look within is a big task, because it's like I don't even have time to do anything. I'm so busy. And so it's slowing down and taking the time to pay attention to how you are perceiving and experiencing your life and the situations that you're dealing with. And know that you're already equipped to recognize these things and to downgrade and resolve them. You're already doing it all the time, but you can do it with intentionality. You can start noticing, especially for chronic things. So episodic things, once in a blue moon, you'll have a sore throat, or you'll develop like a UTI. If it's not a chronic issue, those are just interesting points to look back at experiences you've had where you got horribly sick with the stomach flu, and you say, oh my goodness, it was an indigestible morsel that I was dealing with, and this is what it was. And so you can reflect back on times in your life and illnesses, periods of symptoms that you went through, and make those connections. But if something's become chronic and you're like, I'm always in flare-ups of physical pain or tooth pain or skin issues, that's when you have to start really making the connections, because our bodies, when we do have a shocking conflict, it flags, it takes a snapshot of everything going on in our world and in our environment. And so we can have a lot of these tracks and triggers where we're constantly being reactivating this conflict outside of our awareness. And so the goal really first is to pay attention and bring it all into your awareness so that you can see, oh, this is how I am unconsciously reactivating that. I developed a perception of the world when I had that shock, and I'm always seeing the world through the lens of I'm not good enough, I'm not fast enough, I'm not strong enough. And so that perception, it's kind of always active to some degree. And so you have to become aware of how you're seeing yourself and the world and other people. And so it's a lot of inner work. Look within, go within. And that's like ancient teaching, and it's such wisdom, because if we are constantly externally oriented, and even if you're doing everything perfect from like a lifestyle perspective, you're eating right and you're exercising and you're doing all of the things, if you're overwhelmed, if you're stressed, if you're frustrated, if you're beating up on yourself for not being where you wish you were already, all of those things are playing a role. And so it's going behind the scenes, looking behind the curtain, and really seeing the lenses through which you see the world, your perception of everything.
Mhm. Yeah, well said. I did an episode just the other day where I was doing a tribute to one of my teachers, Dr. David Hawkins, and I was kind of going through the scale of consciousness and everything. And one of the things we talked about was the tipping point from moving to sort of what would be anti-life to what is be pro-life is the level of 200, which is the level of courage. And the hallmark of that is having the capacity and the willingness to actually look at things honestly, having the courage to look at your life honestly. So it's like until we're able to actually do that, then because then when we look at it honestly, then we can actually start to address what's really fundamentally going on. Otherwise, I feel like it's very easy to run around wanting it to be something else because we're not quite ready to look at exactly what it is. So what I love about this kind of work is that when people are open to it, I feel like there's so much space for just evolution and growth to occur for people. I mean, I know firsthand this type of work has been very important for me, and I think you had said in one of your videos I was watching, um, it's really until you experience it, you have to have certain experiences around this, and then you see it in your life, your firsthand. And when you see how it works firsthand, then you start to really trust it. It's a different sense of knowing.
Absolutely.
So one of the questions would be when people have, and I want to go through the biological phases too, so you can outline that for people and sort of give an example of how it works. But when people have then recognized the conflict, so essentially is the idea that as soon as someone recognizes the conflict and then resolves the conflict, that then the body starts to heal.
Yes, well, yeah, it's when, whether they consciously recognize it or not, it can resolve without conscious awareness, because the thing about biological conflicts is that they're biological, and like
Mhm.
animals experience them, we're experiencing them all the time. A practical resolution typically is going to be just a spontaneous, oh, I have a territorial loss conflict, I don't have a job, I get a new job, and then that spontaneously resolves. So the problem is now gone. But when you're adding in that conscious element, because you're seeing how tangled up you've gotten within your perception of yourself and your self-image and your self-talk and all of that, that's when this recognition, sometimes it can just be, oh my goodness, I've been devaluing myself or feeling unsupported. And it can be that awareness that takes, if you're in a pain stage, even like, let's say you've resolved something, but this pain, it just keeps coming back. People can have a recognition moment of knowing it's this, and their pain can go from like an 8 to a 1 or a 2, or to a zero even, through that process of recognition. So yes, you do want to, see what is the essence of this, what does GNM say about this, now what does this look like in my life, because there's like the title, the theme, but you are a unique individual, and how you are seeing and perceiving and experiencing this it's all you, which is really cool. And that's one of the things that resonates with me the most about GNM, is that it's so unique to the individual, where everything else doesn't take into account how do I see it. Not two people can experience the same type of shock, a divorce, a loss, something tragic happening, but you see it differently than I see it. I perceive it in one way, you perceive it in another. And because of that perception, our bodies adapt in different ways to the situation. And so it is resolving is evolving. When you are able to recognize and see where you keep getting stuck, where you keep reactivating this conflict, you can see it really is, it's such a window into your personal growth. Whatever you're dealing with chronically, it is your personal invitation to evolve beyond it. And if you stay stuck there, you're stuck at whatever that level is. And once you do have the courage, because it takes radical self-honesty to see some of the things about ourselves. Like for myself personally, it's kind of like, woo, am I ready to acknowledge this? Am I ready to see this? Am I ready to do the work and really seeing you're doing that thing again? You're perceiving your partner in a certain way, and you are, creating anger and creating overwhelm for yourself, not because, I'm overwhelmed, my life is overwhelming. It's like, well, it's how you are engaging with your life that is overwhelming to you. And so that takes 100% personal responsibility. And one of the reasons that some people may not be resonating with GNM, or like they're not into it, or they kind of don't want it to be true in a sense, because it takes away all scapegoats, all outside things that we like to, point the finger at and say, this is the reason, this is the cause, and you have to turn it all back to yourself. And it's how I'm perceiving this thing. Even if something, terrible was done to you and you have been like the victim of abuse, you get to choose how now you want to move forward in your life. You're not stuck because of that. You're only stuck because of your perception of what happened and how you are seeing yourself as a result of it. And so it's a huge invitation to let's shake things up. Let's look at things differently. Let's move beyond this. But that takes some expansion of your mind and the way that you think about things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean that can be a hard one for people to grasp, I think, when we've had really traumatic or hurtful things that have happened at different times. And we just did an interview with Lee Carroll and Monica Moriani, who actually Lee Carroll channels Cryon, which is another entity. And they actually have a very different perspective around it, which is, I think, helpful for people to see too. I think with stuff with trauma, the more perspective you can have on things to see where it lands, to give you different concepts outside of the box that we tend to look at things. That's why we do these series, to try and talk to lots of different people to get different perspective, to see what lands for you. What are you ready to kind of look at, and what might be beneficial. So that episode might be helpful too. That one will come up, I think, or it might have even come up by the time it might have been the episode, I think, actually before yours probably. So check that out if you haven't, and you'll kind of get another perspective on sort of, I think, where you're talking about. So when people are healing, then I think one thing that I'm wondering about is, what's the process look like for them then? So once the resolution is done, do the symptoms just go away? Is there a place for sort of this healing crisis kind of explanation? Like, what can people expect? Because sometimes what I find happens is, in the process of healing, sometimes symptoms don't just get better sort of spontaneously. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And I'm wondering if you can walk us through that process a little bit, so people have an idea of what the journey can look like for different people.
Absolutely, because that is so important. The second biological law, this is what Dr. Hammer identified as the law of two phases, which is very interesting because in medicine, allopathic medicine, they look and they look at these different symptoms and they see them as completely different disease processes, and they label them completely differently. But what Dr. Hammer found was that they are part of a two-phase pattern, which is fascinating. So kind of how this works is our normal day-night rhythm. Normally during the day, our bodies are more sympathetic active, so that's fight or flight, so you can go hunt and get food. And then in the evening, you are resting and digesting. And so we have this normal up and down rhythm. And now the moment that you are shocked by something, you're caught off guard. So let's say there's something that came into your experience and you cannot accept it. You can't process it. You can't digest it. It's stuck in your psyche. You're thinking about it all the time. Boom, that was your conflict shock. That was your DHS. So in that moment, your body shifted into a state of heightened sympathetic activity. And so everybody is kind of aware of this. Oh, this is the fight or flight. This is, cold hands, slower digestion, higher heart rate. Your mind is all over the place. You can't sleep at night. Those are all indications that you're in the cold phase. And so this is the fight or flight. This is the get out of danger phase. And so depending on how long you stay in that phase, there is tissue adaptation taking place. And so for the example of the indigestible morsel conflict, if that's how your psyche perceived the situation, what happens is your digestive tract starts to adapt. And so there's cellular proliferation, and this is for the purpose of either producing more digestive juices or absorbing more of what's going on so that you can break down, with the juices or absorb more of what's happening, because your body only has biological solutions to help you with these things that may not be biological in nature. It's not that you necessarily, swallowed a bone fragment and now your body, that's the biological correlation. All of these programs originally just served very straightforward functions. You swallowed something that you cannot digest, therefore your tissues are going to help you to digest it by producing more digestive juices. Very simple. But as we've evolved and changed and our brains have, developed this capacity to have, metaphorical and figurative experiences of a bone fragment, but really it's a life circumstance that we can't digest, the body is still perceiving it in that ancient way, which is why we need to get on board with our ancient physiology and kind of bridge the modern mind, the ancient body, so that we can understand, oh, when my colon develops a tumor, it's not because I'm being punished for a bad diet. It's not because, something's just gone awry. It's because I've been experiencing this shock. I was in the shock for a long time. So if you think back, animals, nature, animals won't have conflicts that last for years and years and years, issues that they just can't get over necessarily. There's a few exceptions to that in the animal world, which is kind of a whole rabbit hole. But for the most part, you'd either fight the enemy, you'd run away from it, you'd freeze, or you'd die, and then the whole process would be over. But, when we are in conflict for a long time, there's a lot of adaptation. There's a lot that impact in the brain is bigger, and the erosion or the cellular proliferation, whatever tissue adaptation is taking place, depending on the biological program, that determines how long your restoration phase is going to be. So when you resolve that conflict, finally, you break it down, you get over it, you process it, you forgive, you heal, you release. Conflict resolution takes different forms depending on the person. What is it that you need? Do you need, a cathartic moment? Do you need to, tell that person off? Do you need to just make peace and forgive? Something's going to happen though, and you are going to find that resolution. And then this is the big thing to know. Once you're out of the woods with the mental aspect, with the thing that's just been on your mind, once you chill out, once you resolve it, it's not over. And this is why knowing the second biological law is so important, because once the resolution takes place and your psyche is at ease and you're able to sleep again and you breathe a sigh of relief, then the tissue restoration phase begins, or the healing phase begins, because all the tissue that was adapted when you were in conflict now needs to be set back to normal. And so this is for the example of the colon. So if there was tissue growth during that phase, now once the resolution has taken place, there needs to be tissue decomposition, because we don't need those cells anymore. And the body knows those cells are disposable and they are decomposed using bacteria. And so now when you are in this phase, you're fatigued. You're like, oh, I don't have as much energy. You're having diarrhea, bloody diarrhea, perhaps with mucus. And that tends to be, oh my gosh, people say this is horrible. That's typically what will send someone into the doctor, where they get a diagnosis and they say, oh my goodness, you have this problem, which creates a new conflict, often called a diagnosis shock, when you get diagnosed with something. But it's all because we are not aware that this two-phase pattern is happening, that there was adaptation for a long period of time, then there was resolution, and now the body is going through the tissue restoration process. But when you understand it, it doesn't make it comfortable. It's still uncomfortable to be bloated or to have pain or to, be running to the bathroom all day long. It doesn't mean that it's comfortable, but when you understand why it's happening and you're not afraid of some nefarious, mysterious, horrible, disease process going on in your body, you can abide it. You can, and that's a big part of, the work I do with people, is how to chill when you're having symptoms, how to make sense out of understanding the biological laws, seeing that what your body is doing. And it does take a lot of trust, because a lot of people, they just believe that their body is broken, or there's something wrong, or they need outside assistance in order to be okay. And so during that phase, it's kind of it can be a dark night of the soul when you are dealing with these symptoms, and when your body gets to the point of maximum swelling, because there's going to be swelling on the organ level, also on the brain level. And so you get to this point of maximum swelling, and then the body does a big squeeze. And so the big squeeze, it's kind of like giving birth. There is a big squeeze that happens. It could be terrible stomach cramps, a terrible headache. In some biological programs, it's a heart attack, it's a stroke, it's a seizure, it's some big surge of sympathetic activity. But what that is intended to do is to squeeze out the edema and get you back to that normal day-night rhythm. And so knowing this, knowing that there's going to be a big pain, a big discomfort, something that's going to happen, depending on the program. And then I'm going to be through the woods. I mean, it's kind of like the classic old timey doctor that's like, if he makes it through tonight, he'll be okay. Because, depending on how intense the conflict was, how long it lasted, the healing phase and the epicrisis can be extremely intense. And, it would be great one day when we get to where, medicine is using the 5 biological laws to support patients rather than working against the body. We work with it. We'll be able to help a lot of people make it through that phase more easily, with less threat of fatality, because it can happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that raises a good question, is sort of like, when people are going through that, and as a practitioner, where do you know where the line is when it's still part of what is the beneficial healing crisis versus when it's sort of a exacerbation of the quote unquote problem, or how would you look at it from that perspective? I almost think of it sometimes like when um, people have like a fever, right? And it's like, okay, like for the most part, you just got to ride it out, right? As much as you can. But sometimes there's a point where it's like, okay, where you start to get a little bit kind of antsy, a bit like, okay, is it going too far? Do I need to do something to kind of pull it back a little bit? Like, is there a balance there somewhere, or what have you found?
Really depends on the individual. So I can't make, I don't make recommendations for people about anything. All I do is I have to work with where they are, because it's their body. And this is kind of a, like with birth and things like that. It's, as a practitioner, typically, and the reason that often normal bodily processes are interfered with is because the practitioner gets nervous, and they get nervous about, oh, is this my responsibility? And that's, again, that 100% responsibility thing. I have to know my own limits.
Mhm.
I have to know, am I afraid of 105-degree fever? Am I freaked out? Do I need to bring it down? Because I trust my body. I trust that my body, if I'm not adding, this is the thing, one of the biological programs Dr. Hummer discovered that adds a more dangerous element is the kidney collecting tubule conflict. So if you're in healing with any type of issue, any type of biological program, when you're in the tissue restoration phase, if you add panic and fear of death, isolation, abandonment, refugee, and existence, those are kind of the umbrella types of conflicts that will cause this, your kidney collecting tubules shut off and you hold on to water because it's a protective mechanism. But if your brain is already swelling because you're in a healing phase, and your organ is already swelling because you're in a healing phase, and then you add more water to both areas, that's when we can get, major brain swelling, go into a coma type of thing, major pain and pressure and discomfort that can block passageways. But if you're not adding that on top of it, for the most part, for most conflicts, it's self-limited. The body knows what it's doing. The body knows, exactly how much swelling needs to take place, and it's not going to exceed that. It knows exactly how high the fever needs to go, and it's not going to exceed that. It's when we start to meddle and interfere and we're so panicked and afraid that something like medical intervention becomes a life-saving and a helpful thing. But it is for every individual to know themselves, to know their limits, to know how much do I trust my body, do I just want to go in, and there are situations where a person, where they've had a conflict for such a long time and there's so much tissue adaptation, and the healing phase would be so intense that it may be, the best option for some people in that situation is to have a surgery, like let's kind of start over. But having a surgery from the idea, not that, oh, we've got to get all the pieces out
Mm-hmm.
because something, but when you understand this was an adaptation process, I was in conflict for a long time, this removal of tissue is going to help me. I now am aware, I think that you can utilize medical care very intelligently when you know the biological laws.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really good. And it all comes back down to your perception of what you're doing, right? Which will either create more harm or not, I think, in many ways. Is there ever a place for things like when people are going through the process, is it ever supported with something like homeopathy or something that's not really a suppressive medicine, that's more kind of homeopathy, I think it almost was like pushing the bus along a little bit. It's kind of assisting it in moving in the direction that you want it to move in. And and often in the healing crisis, you'll see, Herring's law even kind of play out a little bit, where you'll see symptoms will show up in a way where they will be from inside out, from top down, in reverse order of how they showed up or were suppressed. Do you find that sort of process, or is there therapies like that you find that can be supportive during this process?
Oh yeah, lots of GNM consultants and practitioners will use, homeopathy or, Chinese medicine or Ayurveda, all of these different systems and tools and ways of it. You think of it as supporting the body. We want to support the body, with good nutrition. We want to support the body with herbs and supplement, with things that can help you to get through these phases. And so certainly there's lots of different practitioners who use lots of different things. Myself personally, I just tend to be a minimalist with all supplements and things, because I've gone far to the extreme with it, and I'm more on the minimal side now. But certainly a lot of people are helped tremendously by holistic and homeopathic remedies and interventions while they're in that phase. And so I say use whatever makes sense to you, whatever feels
Hmm.
good, whatever resonates, use it, because the more comfortable, anything that makes you more comfortable and more kind of relaxed in this intense phase, the better. And so I'm open for people using whatever, but I want to know, my main thing I help people with is, what is your relationship to this intervention that you're using? How do you feel about it? Is it, are you using it as a suppressant? Because sometimes people will be in, kind of feet in both worlds
Hmm.
of kind of understanding GNM, kind of using a lot of other things. But it's like, I want to know why are you doing a vitamin C infusion? Because do you think that the vitamin C is going to be, killing cancer or boosting your immune system? Because that, kind of indicates to me that they're not fully into the understanding that the tissue adaptation, that the cancer itself is meaningful. So when you're trying to still kill the tumor, that indicates that you're split kind of in two worlds. And so I'm just very interested in, how do you think about this intervention or this thing that you're doing?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too. It reminds me of Dr. John Sarno's work with mind body prescription and whatnot. He would often say, don't do anything else, because as soon as you start to incorporate anything else, you're sort of taking away from the ability to actually clear what really needs to be cleared. Especially if it's basically, he would say, if it's from an mental emotional conflict of some sort, that if you're adding anything else in, you're sort of still taking away from being able to completely work with it on that level. So I can totally appreciate that as well. But I think it's neat to just also, it's a kind of medicine that really honors the individual process. It goes back to letting the patient have a say as far as what's going and what works best for them at any point in time too.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, is some people, they want to be told what to do. They want to say, doc, give me a prescription, I'll follow it to the T. And they want to take out, that personal responsibility and that personal understanding, because it's more difficult. It takes more brain power. It's easy to be given a prescription and say, okay, if I just do this, I'll be okay. And this is a big reason we're in the predicament we're in today, is because we are outsourcing our own personal understanding. We think, oh, I didn't go to school for this, and so I don't know, and I can't understand my body. I'm just just Joe. I don't know how my body works, and so doc, tell me what to do. And that whole idea of outsourcing your personal responsibility and understanding to an authority figure is kind of the essential problem, is that because you can be duped, you can be told all sorts of things about your body. And if it doesn't make logical sense to but you just keep doing it anyways, because you have this kind of little old me syndrome of, oh, well, who am I to know? Doctor knows best. And that's what I see a lot of people doing, just lining up, taking interventions, doing things that don't really make sense to them, but they're like, it's just a thing to do. And I don't know any different. I don't know any better. And so, when a person is kind of in that mode, I really do encourage them to look at, why are you doing this? What makes sense to you? So, like for me, I trust my body, even if it's doing something that is painful or seems crazy. It's like, I know that my body is so much smarter than my educated mind. And so I trust my innate intelligence. And I really want to encourage people to make that connection, because it's kind of a transcendent experience. I actually had a kind of an awakening moment while I was learning and reading about chiropractic philosophy, because it was like, just entrusting your body. What does that look like? Like, to really tune in to, like, when your body says, I'm hungry, when your body says, I have to go to the bathroom. It's like, I had a moment where I was just like, whoa, my body is so wise and so brilliant. And all of the things that it's doing right now to keep my heart beating, when I think about all of the processes happening on a cellular organic level of, like, the chemicals in my blood, you take the most brilliant chemist in the world. That chemist doesn't know exactly what its body needs, what his body needs in that moment. Only the body knows. And so I think having that reverence for the body, instead of thinking of it as just this stupid machine who breaks down, we have to take organs out, it does random stuff. That to me is such a core essence of this, is, do you trust and understand your body, or do you feel like you are just kind of in this broke down junker who needs to, just have all its parts replaced? Because that ideology is affecting everything about your choices and how you're perceiving everything about your life.
Yeah, it's such an important point, Melissa. Um, I would say that the concept of self-authority and sovereignty as it's coming out is probably one of the most, if not the most important thing that's coming out of everything right at the moment. It is, and I think what's such an important piece around that, and you kind of tied a couple things together there, is that it requires us to listen again back to the body. Because what I honestly think is happening a lot of times is people often get a sensation in their body when something does not. I really think it happens. Like, if it happens, whether or not we are connected to it or aware of it or not is a very different story. But I think that we get something, the body tells us information all the time. And then I think what happens is we might even get that feeling, but then we we almost kind of rationalize it away as it's not something to pay attention to. And unfortunately, I feel like that's gone on for a long time, right from as kids. I mean, we're kind of taught very early on to very much disconnect in a lot of ways from what the body's actually telling us. Either don't listen to it, or don't feel that, or here, do this so you don't have to feel this. And I think then it creates a population of people that are not connected to what their body's always trying to tell them. And so then we start to not trust our body. But in order to trust the body, you have to start the process again of reconnecting and listening to it. So I think it's such an important piece. It's almost impossible to have self-authority until you start to trust the body again. But in order to trust the body, you have to start the process of slowing down and listening to the body, and then learning from the wisdom that it's sharing.
Spot on. Absolutely. And that is, the system, the medical system and it really does, it starts preconception. It starts with people who are going to have a child and how they approach that project. It's like, how do you approach that project? Are typically people are, in the doctor's office, like as soon as they find out they're pregnant. And who is, directing that whole process? The medical system. And the medical system sees the body as broken. It sees the birth process as an emergency and as a problem, rather than the most organic and natural thing that has always been happening, and that is programmed into the body, this deep wisdom. And we have programming from television that says, oh, the baby's head can be too big for your pelvis, and a C-section is really easy, and an epidural is great. And so that's how we start that indoctrination process, is with women in the birthing system. And then children, they just come out into the world not trusting their body, not believing that their body knows what it's doing. And we inject them with things. And like you said, when they have a fever, we bring it down. We don't say, oh, isn't this interesting? What is this teaching us about the body, about your experience? And so it's a whole reconnection process. And you're absolutely right to reclaim our sovereignty. You cannot be sovereign if you are outsourcing your information about your body to an outside authority. And that's the amazing thing about the 5 biological laws in this work, is it's like, it's kind of, instead of having the intermediary, instead of needing to go to the priest, and instead of needing to go to the doctor, this is like the tearing of the curtain. This is, here's the information. This is how your body works. And yes, you may benefit from support and guidance and assistance from someone who's trusted their body for a longer period of time, and who has seen bodies do things and then heal and recover, because that gives you strength, and that gives you confidence of knowing, oh, I've seen someone make it through a heart attack. I've seen someone, make it through this type of intense situation, and you can do it too. And then you have to work that muscle. You have to build up, you have to see. And that's what I suggest for people who, if you've got, kind of a big health symptom, like, let's start with something small. Let's notice when you have a zit. For me, that was so instructive to see, oh, I used to think all these different wild things about what causes acne. But when I learned the GNM connection, that it's feeling attacked or feeling soiled, my body creates a little protective shield against the thing I felt attacked by. And then when that shield is no longer necessary, it decomposes it with bacteria, and boop, there's a little, there's a zit on my face. It's like, oh. And so you start small and notice a stuffy nose after you had a frustration or an annoyance, or, a stink conflict, or were out in public and someone was smoking, and you're like, who smokes anymore? And you're like, this stinks. And then the next day you have, a stuffy nose, and it's like, oh, that's so interesting. And so you start making all these connections, and you start to see, my body has known what it was doing all along. Back 20 years ago, when they took my gallbladder out, I saw that I had a chronic identity conflict, or a chronic territorial anger conflict. I had that issue at work. I wasn't fitting in. I didn't know my place. And then I would have those terrible cramps in my stomach. And then they took my gallbladder out, and I thought, oh, thank God they got this horrible broke down organ out. And now you see, oh, there was wisdom there. There was intelligence there. There was adaptation taking place that I thought was a problem. Isn't that interesting? And so you start bringing all of these things, and that's how you can become this sovereign being who understands their body, and you move forward in the world not fearing symptoms. Especially like if you're a parent and your child has something going on, that can be the most terrifying thing in the entire world, because it's like, this is my baby. I need to, take them in and take them. But when you understand, oh, I know what this means. I know where this came from, and I know how to help and support my child through this, that's sovereignty. That's freedom.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's great. Um, and you're around the idea of starting with something small. It totally reminds me of when I'll work with patients that have that are working with certain, you know, stronger mental emotional challenges, right? And the idea of sometimes being able to stay with some of the sensation long enough to actually let it sit there and let it kind of dissolve and bring some awarenesses, which is tricky to do sometimes for really intense ones. So we usually say start with little ones. You know, it's like the bourgeoisie suffering. It's like start with some of the smaller grade suffering, like something like maybe impatience when you're in a lineup, you know, or if you're not getting to work quite on the time and you're stuck in traffic, you know, something like that. Maybe don't try and tackle the you know, parent issues that you've got or the big issues with your partner or something like that. It might be too much and blow you out of the water, but at least if you can start small, you start to build up a network for how to do that process even.
Absolutely. Yep. Start small, see how capable you are of noticing and of shifting, of, like that example is perfect, of being in a line and noticing that that frustration, that impatience, because these are patterns, and so how you do the small things is also how you do the big things, just at scale. And so when you can see, oh, I was able to become aware of it, to calm my nervous system, to regulate myself, and I shifted just from a couple of different thoughts, from being enraged and upset and frustrated and gritting my teeth, to everything's actually fine. And when you start seeing that on a small scale, you can say, oh, this is my power. My power is in how I'm choosing to perceive the things in my world. And I've got a typical reaction, a built-in response to stuff that happens. But my power is in recognizing it when it happens. Oh, there's that feeling. Oh, this is how I teach people to notice their tracks and triggers. So, there are biological, external, internal reminders of conflict. You have to notice, oh, I'm feeling that feeling again. And you can really get so in tune with your body when like I know prior to having a breakout, I know that I'm in the conflict phase. I can
Hmm.
tell that I'm in it now because I've tuned into those little cues. And that's the cool thing, is the body does. It gives you these little clues, indications. And when you're tuned into it, you can see it, recognize it, downgrade and resolve it almost immediately, so that I've gotten to the point where I can prevent, like if I notice that feeling attacked or feeling soiled experience going on in my nervous system, I can notice it and downgrade it and shut it off, and I won't even have a breakout. You'll never see an external anything because it was so brief. And that's really the goal, is to make it so you are so adaptive and so responsive and aware of your experience, that you're able to recognize and shift these things before they become kind of big, because that's the only problem. It's the intensity and the duration of the conflict determines the intensity and duration of the tissue restoration phase. And so, if you're listening to this and you don't have anything going on, big health wise in your life, learn all this now. Learn it when you're healthy. Learn it before you're symptomatic, because it does. It's a project. It's a big project when you're already in a chronic health condition. Then you gather this information because you're dealing with layers of conflict triggers and reactivations and symptoms that you have to learn how to make peace with, and also the life situations you've got to make peace with. So it's not impossible. You certainly can do it. It's just you've got to look at this like a daily, constant, because all day long there's going to be invitations for you to be frustrated, to be annoyed, to devalue yourself, to go back into all of the conflicts that started this situation to begin with. And so it's a taller order, but you're certainly capable of it. Of course you are, because this is what your life has presented you with. This is what you're experiencing. You can evolve through this, or you can choose to suffer through it. It depends on how you approach it, and what you think you're capable of.
Hmm. And that's really then how you build resilience. I mean, really, that is resilience. It's like being able to work with things because you're so aware of what's going on that you're able to kind of work with them in the moment, you know, or as close to the moment as you can, as opposed to leaving them for days, weeks, months, years, lifetimes, right? If you can be aware of that enough to work with that in the moment, you're just, nothing is ever, you know, I think of it like an ember. You just let the ember just kind of fizzles out, as opposed to you adding dry, you know, dry grass and kindling and gasoline to it and keep making it bigger and bigger and bigger by not addressing it. So I think that's wonderful. It's almost like feels like karma free, you know, like you kind of just don't create any major ripples because you're working with them as you're going along. So, and what a wonderful way to live your life, I think, being in that sort of state of awareness with what's going on so that you're just not creating, because like once those conflicts start, they have ripples, right? They ripple out and create conflicts in other places. I mean, so many times our own personal conflicts then create conflicts with other people that don't need to even be there. There's so this ripple effect of stuff. So we don't only ease the suffering for ourselves, but I think we ease the suffering for everybody around us by just holding that, being able to keep that sort of space.
Totally. Yeah. The resiliency, I do. I see it as like, the immune system really is. It's my ability to recognize and respond resourcefully to whatever is on my plate today. And, like here, there's that ember and it's on my shirt. And how long I leave it there determines whether it burns a hole through my shirt or whether it's just nothing. If you dust it off, if you notice it because you're tuned in and you're paying attention and you're not distracted and you're not medicated, you're here and you're present and you see the thing coming, you respond swiftly and resourcefully to it. That is immunity. That is meant, so it's about how you are responding in a moment. Really is that's how you build resilience and this ability to really be in ownership, self-ownership for your experience.
Hmm. So, two parts for kids I'm wondering about. So, can kids, when they are, so when the mom's pregnant, can the parents' conflict be passed on to the child so that they actually are born into life with a conflict already? Also, at the same point, because as soon as that nodal cord is developed, and the child is connected to mom's nervous system, if the mom goes through things during pregnancy, is the child then also able to pick up the same conflict? And wondering, how do you work with that with say an infant?
So the child is a unique consciousness. And so, yes, so when a woman is pregnant, everything she experiences, her baby also experiences it, but it's having a unique experience of it. So they may not experience it in the same way the mother is. So they might develop a different biological program. They could develop the same type of biological program, but it can be different because, again, it's a unique consciousness who is perceiving things in its own way. And so, yeah, so when a woman is pregnant, the stuff she goes through, the shock she experiences, the trauma, the abandonment, all of the things the child is experiencing. And then some, from under age 7, when we're in this kind of hypnotic brain state, some schools of thought say that the child does pick up every conflict that the mother is dealing with, especially the mother, but also, the father too. And so that's where I work with the parent. So if your child is manifesting some symptom and they're under the age of 7, we got to look at what's going on with you, and I've talked to mothers recently even that have, their child was home birth and they've only been breastfed and, she's eating healthy and all of that. And she's like, my child has, is developing rashes and eczema. What's going on here? And it's frustrating, especially when you think you're doing everything right. And that's the cool thing about bringing in this element and understanding, okay, so the child has been with you constantly. They're never away from me. We co-sleep, we do all the things. Then it's like, okay, well, what are you dealing with? What kind of separation conflicts are you experiencing? And then she was like, oh, it makes perfect sense. We had to move away. And so we're not with these friends and people anymore. And so she's been experiencing a separation conflict. She may not even be manifesting symptoms, which she wasn't, but the child is feeling everything she's feeling about this loss, this separation, this desire to reconnect. And so, yes, with children, they're perceptive and they are receptive and they're picking up on all of the stuff that we are projecting out to them, which is why resolving your conflicts is the whole, like, put your oxygen mask on first, because you cannot help your child if you are not helping yourself. There's nothing external you can do to help the child. If you are in turmoil, if you are in conflict, you have to model. It's a modeling process. You have to model to them how to resolve a conflict, how to be relaxed, how to be at ease. And so that's where, you learning how to do this for yourself, that's the best thing you can do for your child.
Yeah, very well said. I find that all the time too, and it's such an important one when parents are bringing their kids in. Doesn't mean there's not something going on with the kids that can be looked at, but it always still has to start with the parents because kids are like sponges that way. I remember talking to Dr. Stuart Shanker out here, who's one of the experts in self-regulation, and he said essentially that once a child's born, there is a very physiological, or I should say, very much the physiological connection through the umbilical cord then changes to a psychological connection called this interbrain sort of relationship. And so the child picks up directly on what's going on with the parents. And they actually are watching the parents, not consciously, but they're watching the parents and they are looking at, it's like the parents' prefrontal cortex kind of becomes the template for how they are going to deal with things. So even when we try to, as parents, protect our kids from seeing what's going on, they still know. They still feel it. So we can't really, there's no pretending or sort of hiding. The only real way out of it is us to keep trying to resolve our own stuff so that the kids just don't feel it. So it's not even what we say or do, it's really what we are and what we're actually experiencing inside. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's a really important one for all of us parents to look at.
Totally.
One thing that you had mentioned before that I think is an important part to touch on here is in the healing phase, the microbes actually play a beneficial role. And so now we are learning more about, as people are familiar with things like the gut biome, and we're looking at the differences and beneficial effects of microbiome and microbes in general. But I would say still the predominant theory is people think of microbes as being dangerous and not really synergistic in any way. So maybe from a GNM perspective, can you talk a little bit about the role of microbes?
Yes, this is the fourth biological law, and this is the ontogenetic role of microbes in the body, in that they evolved alongside with us. They are our helpers. Dr. Hummer calls them, they're like seasonal workers. And so there's bacteria everywhere in our body, and there are certain types that are that live in certain germ layers, and they have jobs. And so these bacteria, they just sit dormant, and that's why you can swab someone's throat, or test their lung fluid, and they could have tuberculosis. They could have, strep bacteria, but they're not sick. They're not expressing any symptoms. And so that can be quite mind-boggling if you think that it is the bacteria that causes the problem, because here we are present with tons of, E. coli and all this bacteria in our bodies, but nothing's going on. It's because those bacteria are just there waiting for signals from the brain, from the nervous system to activate. And the thing that activates them is that tissue restoration phase. So like I mentioned, so the body, when it's in adaptation, there's either tissue growth or tissue loss or functional loss. But if whatever has happened during the conflict phase, we have to set it back to normal. And that's what the bacteria, that's what their role is. They aid in decomposition. So like tubercular bacteria, it eats up, it breaks down a tumor that grew during the conflict active phase. A way that you can know that this is active is if you're having night sweats. So if you're having night sweats, that indicates that the tubercular bacteria are actively chewing up and breaking down tissue cells that were proliferated during a period of conflict. And something that's important there is to make sure you're eating lots of protein, because the tubercular bacteria, it metabolizes, it needs a lot of protein to do its job. Now, there's also bacteria that help with tissue restoration. So like in the bones, for example, if there was tissue loss during the active conflict, now we need to build it back up. And so certain bacteria will help to build up the bones again. And so they play a role, and they are nothing to fear. They work alongside with us. And so there's so much to the story of understanding, okay, so what about if you go on vacation and you drink the water and then you get diarrhea? And it's like, well, yes, when you move to a new location, plane travel wasn't around thousands of years ago when these biological programs were developing. And so it is unusual to have a whole new, flock of bacteria types inside of your body. However, they will only affect you if you've been dealing with a conflict, because otherwise, if because not every single person who goes to a new country and drinks the water gets sick. It's only some people. And so that's where we have to look at your unique experience. But then you've got this whole host of, I have one of my GNM colleague people, he calls them spicy microbes, so they're new to your system. They are kind of, they're coming from a different country, whatever is endemic to the people there. And now you have them in your system. And so you could have, a bigger healing phase because basically you've got this whole host of new workers and you have a very intense healing phase, or like traveler's diarrhea or whatever. But that's because you had to have also been experiencing an indigestible morsel conflict that got resolved in order to express that symptom. And so, so microbes are helpers, they're friends, they are there to assist us during the tissue restoration process.
Mhm. I like that concept too, because it again brings it back that you feel like you're in more control of your body, you're in more control of your situation. You're not going places that are just scary for certain things that you're gonna, and then even that program starts to set you up to get it. And I know a lot of people that are so scared they're gonna get it. Doesn't matter what they do, they're gonna get something because they've already seen it happening. Um, but I so like the approach of, depending on what's going on inside your body. And it's kind of like this whole concept of terrain theory and germ theory in general. But that when you think of it from a terrain theory, it's like, depends on how susceptible you are to things, and most of that is within your control for a lot of regard, as far as how susceptible you're going to be to anything. It's why you can have three people there and get exposed to the same thing, and one person gets it and two people don't. And again, like you said, people often think of just the physical stuff that they're doing, but if you can also kind of keep going up the ladder a little bit and think of what are the other things that might be, like you said, that I'm not digesting properly, any mental emotional pieces that are tied around there, those are all layers of susceptibility in my mind. So you can do some of the physical stuff if that makes you feel good and that resonates with you, but it doesn't mean don't disregard looking at some of the other parts of it, right?
Yes, and the kind of terrain theory world, I find very focused on the external stuff, on the
Totally.
detoxing, on the cleansing, on the external, on all of that. And after, because I was in that camp for a very long time, and kind of after learning GNM, I'm seeing that, the changes that you make when you come into contact with terrain theory, or just holistic lifestyle in general, it changes you. It changes your constituency and your kind of how you see yourself in the world. It's like, I'm taking care of myself, I'm
Exactly.
detoxing. And so what is that? That's a boost in confidence. That is a change of your self-concept, because I'm taking care of myself, I'm doing the right thing. And so part of your mind is like, I'm not getting sick because I have a strong terrain, because I'm doing all this great stuff. But it's like, you changed. You, as an individual, as an organism, your resiliency, your susceptibility to conflict shocks changed along with these lifestyle changes that you thought were the cause and the reason, because my immune system's strong and I'm not eating this bad food and I'm not poisoning my body in this way, and so that's why I'm more resilient against disease. But there's more to it. And so yes, and some people, that's where you're at, and you believe wholeheartedly in the lifestyle changes. But once you open up to, how did that change my psyche, how did that change my resiliency, how did that change how I feel in situations, I feel this sense of robustness that before I felt a sense of weakness. And so while the lifestyle changes were part of you getting to where you are now, when you kind of bring in what really was making me sick before, because by the same token, there are people who do all of the right things, all of the terrain theory stuff, all of the detoxing and the health promotion and the nutrition. And when that person develops something like cancer, for example, and that was, for me, it was so hard in the chiropractic world. I thought that I had all health stuff on lockdown. I was like, oh, I will never get any disease ever, because I'm doing all of the right things and I'm teaching all of my patients to do all of the right things. But then someone in the community, or one of the leaders of the organizations I was a part of, get cancer, and it just blow my mind, and it kind of would shake my confidence in the stuff that I thought was the answer. I was like, that person is like the pinnacle, they do all of the things more than I'm doing, how could they get cancer? And so that's where understanding GNM, that it doesn't matter. You could have the cleanest terrain, the healthiest terrain, you could be doing all of the right things. But if in a moment you are shocked and caught off guard, and all of the things that you're doing didn't build up, a resilience in this particular realm, or it was just so shocking or so overwhelming, because that's the thing, we're all susceptible, unless you're just a complete, Zen monk who doesn't, who truly has surrendered
Hmm.
all self, who can't be conflicted about anything. We can get caught off guard. And it doesn't matter how healthy you are, how clean and strong your terrain is, that's going to matter later on when you resolve the conflict and your body is going through the tissue restoration phase. That healthy terrain is going to make it easier for you to get through that, but you will still develop the tissue adaptations called cancer, or the tissue adaptation called, heart disease, if you have a particular type of conflict shock, regardless of how right you're doing all of the behavior, all of the external things. And I think that's so important for people to grasp.
Yeah, I think it's really important. In that last episode I did when I talked about the scale of consciousness, I think of that as being so foundational because that's what is the lens that you see your world through. So when you have a conflict, and again, people can have a shock from like almost anything at certain points, no matter where you are. But I think your ability to catch it and then to work with it and to ultimately heal from it really depends on where you are and how you're perceiving the world around you. So if I am stuck in sort of a place of fear, then I don't think I have a very big toolbox to work with that conflict when it arises, and I will probably spiral out of control with that conflict. If I'm hovering somewhere in a place of like willingness or courage or or acceptance, then I think I've got a bigger toolbox to then deal with that conflict that comes up. I can start to work with it. I can see different perspectives on it. I'm open to understanding it on a bigger level. So then I think that's such a foundation for how long these things stay and how big they can potentially get.
Totally. Yes. And it is, it's tuning in. Where am I at? What am I capable of in this moment? How can I, raise my threshold? How can I become more resilient, more able to handle this stuff? And just having these concepts is so helpful. Where am I? Just self-assessment, honest self-assessment of where am I right now with what I'm able to handle, with my understanding of what's going on in my body, and what can I do to boost that. And that's where so many things can help you to get to that point of willingness, get to that point of courage, get to that point. It's like, even just, and that's where the lifestyle things are very important. If you start just walking or moving your body or doing breath work, or there's so many little inroads to getting to the place where you can get to the place where you can go
Mhm.
through these wonderful resolution processes.
Yeah, nice. I think last thing I just wanted to touch on was, given where we are right now and what we're seeing with the sort of the pandemic part of things, what would be the conflict shock related to what is going on with COVID?
So from the GNM perspective, we have to look at the symptoms that a person is expressing. And it's kind of shady that the symptom list of COVID is like all sorts of different things. And so I always go with what's the symptom, not, what is, we have to look at how is it expressing through one individual. So big overarching things are not interesting to me. Statistics are not interesting to me. I'm interested in individuals
Hmm.
and what did this person go through. So if a person had tickles in their lungs and a cough, what that indicates is they had a territorial fear conflict that affected the bronchial mucosa. And so there was loss of tissue and then restoration of tissue. And then when you were coughing and feverish, you didn't have COVID, your body was going through a tissue adaptation process, and now you're symptomatic. Or if you lost your sense of smell, there was a strong stink conflict. If, so depending on the symptom that shows up, that indicates the flavor, the nuance, the type of conflict or the combination, because often it's not just the cough. We've got the cough, we've got a stuffy nose, we've got a sore throat, we've got all these different things. And so we want to look at stink, can't swallow, territorial fear. So it depends on how it shows up for the person. That's going to help us determine what conflict they experienced.
I think it's also fascinating. It also makes it really fun as a practitioner too. You never really get bored in practice. There's so much material to keep working with. So
Oh, yeah.
wonderful.
People are endlessly interesting.
That's for sure. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap everything up here? Any other comments? And then also where people can learn more about your work, where we can send them, anything else that you got going on?
Yeah, I highly encourage you to just learn this. Take it in and observe and notice and be curious and make those connections, because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and you have to see it for yourself. This is, this work is not something that you take on faith. It's not something that you believe. it is an empirical, observable science that is happening in your body all of the time. And so once you can kind of draw these connections and see it for yourself in your body, that's how you develop that confidence. That's how you develop, just this, meditate on the wisdom of your body. Think about all of the things that are going right in your body right now for you to merely be existing. Like really get in tune with that. What does that look like? Does that feel weird? Does that feel foreign? Does that, do you kind of scoff at even the idea of that? That's interesting. So I encourage you to, go within, observe your health paradigm. Why do you think that people develop symptoms and sickness? Because that health paradigm is shaping everything about your life experience, what you will experience in the future should you develop some type of health symptom. And so right now, the most important thing is to learn how your body works so you can become free and sovereign. And so that's what I would suggest. I do have a lot of resources on my website, which is drmelissasell.com. My YouTube channel has a lot of educational tutorials and videos so you can start wrapping your head around this and how it works. And the work I do with people in my coaching is teaching that resilience piece, the awareness, the recognition, how to notice, how to get in tune. And then what do you do once you see it? How can you start to go to work on downgrading and resolving and making sense out of chilling out about the things that make you angry and make you frustrated and make you feel a sense of self-devaluation? We go through the childhood stuff. We'll go through the layers of your experience. And so that's how I help people, is really in bringing in the wisdom of GNM, but making it practically usable of like, okay, so what do I do with this? How do I shift my perception of this bite conflict where I want to snap at people and speak my mind, but I'm holding back? We have to go through those layers, and there's just so much interesting stuff to be discovered about yourself through this work. And so I just encourage you to dive in at whatever level, feels right for you right now.
Nice. I'll make sure that I put all of those links in the show notes here. And yeah, I think it's such important work. If there's one thing you want to do to, outside of just your overall physical health, but I think just to live a bigger, more enjoyable life, like these are really, really good skills to work on. I really feel like the more that we work on these things, everything, your relationships start to improve, your health starts to improve, your enjoyment all around for life just starts to improve. I feel like your bubble gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you resolve some of these things. So I think it's fascinating. And I remember you saying once, I love that you keep bringing back to the trust the body, like trust the wisdom inherent in the body. And I think you said once, you just being here is a legacy of your biological success. I thought that was a great quote. So everybody listening, go back, make some notes on that, start to pay some attention to, I think at the end of the day, sit for a little bit and just sort of touch in on what's going on. What do you feel like? Make some notes about staying, make some correlations if there's symptoms going on. See when symptoms kind of exacerbate versus when they come back down. All of that stuff is there, and it's free information, and it's accessible at any given moment in time. I think we just need to slow down to be able to listen to what the body's telling us. So Dr. Melissa Sell, thank you so much. Wonderful chatting with you. We'll have to do this again at some point.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is a great conversation. And yes, we will.